I'd like to introduce our principal author, retired Lieutenant Colonel Brian Reed, who I've known since the 1960s. What an incredible man. Reed BA of the RCA, commonly referred to as the OBG nowadays, the old bald guy, but a great author. He's written books such as Canada's Little Army in the Field about South Africa. He's written a book called No Holding Back, one of the finest books about Normandy that you can find. And one of Canada's greatest historians, John Granestein, has said that Brian Reed is one of the best military historians in Canada. His latest book is Green on Go, about the airborne gunners. Just a great author. So I'd like to turn it over to Brian Reed now to tell a couple of stories, but tell us what he's working on. It's really important. Brian's a great guy. Feel free to talk to him. Sign up to talk to him. Tell your story. Brian, over to you.
Okay, I think I'm on, and Ernie pretty well summed up my career. My part in the project consists of preparing the chapters on sea battery deployment as part of the 3 PPCLI battle group in 2002 and the 2006 tours of A and E batteries, respectively, with 1st Patricia's and 1 RCR. That's an experience the battery commander of E battery described as no shit war fighting. I've been able to create a skeleton outline of each of these tours, but my colleagues and I would be more than grateful for your recollections. If we got a slide, Kevin, let's whip it up. You know, frankly, after nearly 5 decades of peace, no matter how hard and how well we trained, we were in an age of blank ammunition and arty simulators, and our contribution to the battlefield fell out of favor among the other arms. A bit of time on the 2-way range took care of that, but the damage had been done. A platoon commander in 1 RCR told me that the disdain for guns shared by him and his comrades rapidly disappeared in battle. Furthermore, he admitted he actually found himself thinking on more than one occasion, thank God the guns. What we want to do is to explain why and how this happened and how we overcame what only can be described from our point of view as fuzzy thinking, and how we succeeded despite inadequate equipment, organization, and even tactics. In other words, we want to tell the complete story, warts and all, the good along with the bad, how our gunners, regulars, and reserves, men and women, drawn from all across Canada, met the challenges of war. To be brutally frank, too many accounts ignore the guns, or at best mention them in passing. Perhaps by mentioning that a full party was present, and that is that. A number of years ago, I was contacted by a member of a production team preparing a television program about a battle fought in Korea against overwhelming odds by a platoon of 2 RCR. The platoon commander insisted the supporting artillery from 2 RCHA actually won the battle, and this was supported by the evidence. However, the producers removed all reference to the guns, as it detracted from the dramatic saga of outnumbered Canadian infantrymen fighting and winning. We all know who has the hardest job in the Army, and it ain't us, it's them. Still, our ethos demands we give our all, and this later generation certainly did just that. We can produce an interesting and educational account of our place in Canada's longest war, then your efforts will earn the recognition they deserve. Now, Operation Apollo, the 2002 mission, may be our least well-known part of the war in Afghanistan. Sea Battery deployed a 40-person motor group with the 3rd Patricias. That is pretty well the extent of our collective knowledge. It was not an easy go, and there were some dicey moments. One that pretty well has gone unnoticed took place in March when our mortars fired a coordinated illumination mission, One Dark Night, in support of the 120 millimeter mortars of the U.S. Army's Delta Force. There were other examples, including tracking down Taliban deep in the mountains, enduring several rocket attacks on Kandahar airfield, and perhaps on a lighter note, even the case of the glow-in-the-dark donkey. The battery completed a rigorous after-action review, which provided more than a few hints of the way ahead. Next slide, please. After a hiatus to regroup and reorganize, and including a period when the RCA lacked any operational guns, our next tour was by Task Force Orion, the 1 PPCLI battle group from January to August 2006. It seems as if the battle group was structured for something akin to the Balkans, and there was talk of the battery doing the PRT task. But it found itself in a shooting war in everything but its name, including an example of misused artillery support on 3rd August 2006. Elements of the battle group advanced north towards the fabled white schoolhouse and encountered heavy resistance. At about the same time, another group from the battle group advanced north towards the fabled white schoolhouse and encountered heavy resistance. About the same time, another group from the battle group was attempting to seize a complex known as either the Shadowed Roof or the Yellow Schoolhouse, a few kilometers to the northwest. The rules of engagement just been tightened as a result of ISAF having taken over regional command south, and it seems the word school was interpreted as the current status, although both complexes were no longer functioning in that purpose. Suffice to say, the old adage about too many cooks applied here, and orders to check firing were issued by various people co-located at Kandahar airfield, most of which did not really apply to the tactical situation on the ground. It must be added that these folks did not actually command the troops doing the fighting around either complex. And I'm now going to end up talking about eBattery's Tourist 1 RCR battle group. Its arrival coincides with the transfer of command in its area of operation from the American forces to NATO's International Security Assistance Force. The Taliban, never loath to seize an opportunity, interpreted this as a lack of coalition resolve and undertook an offensive to capture Kandahar and their surrounding countryside. In the meantime, the battle group went on the Operation Medusa, NATO's first ever foray into combat, and this operation was under Canadian command. The first week saw a misreading of the situation and a premature advance and platoon strength that was repulsed. The next day brought a quote unquote friendly airstrike that caused heavy casualties to the same company of 1 RCR. After some regrouping, the operation resumed and eventually succeeded. There are a number of smaller operations over the next few months, including one in which the BSM extracted the battle group commander's party from a desperate situation. And the battery commander said he could see bullets ricocheting off the CO's lab as the BSM was up there hooking up a tow cable. There was another in which the battle group RSM and his driver were killed by a suicide bomber. The same BSM attempted to give first aid to the RSM, but it was too late. Now, that's pretty well it. Our team is eager to hear your stories, and we promise to do our best to retell them as fully and as accurately as possible. I'll give you my word on that. In the meantime, I'll pass the floor to my old friend, Wolf Rydell, who will bring us forward to 2007.
Thanks, Brian. I'd like to say good evening to everyone. And let me start off by saying how very pleased and honored I was when I was asked to participate in this project. Like Brian, I'm a Cold War gunner. I started in the reserves in '65, went regular force in '69 with 2 and 3 RCHA until 1981. At that point, I transferred back to the reserves to go to law school, where I did 4 years as an infantry company commander before carrying on as a legal officer until I retired in 2009. After that, I started going into an interest that I've had for many years, which is writing military set novels, which are all placed in the War on Terror. And that's gotten me involved very much in doing research on the war in Afghanistan. When I was asked last winter to join Brian in working on this book, I just jumped at the chance. I knew Brian from our time together in 2 RCHA in the 70s. And while I didn't know Master Gunner Kevin Smith personally, I certainly knew of him by reputation. Over the last year, I've valued both his insight and his breadth of knowledge on artillery matters. And now that Mark Zolke has come on board, I'm even more happy with the work on this project. Besides being able to work with these people, I'm profoundly privileged to have been able to reconnect with a few people from my past life. And I've had this chance to talk to a large group of a new generation of gunners who've worked so hard under such very difficult conditions. My part of the story is focusing on Operation Athena 1 in Kabul and the years 2007 and 2008 of Operation Athena 2. Throughout this, I'm also tracing the story of the Army and the artillery's transformation from a Cold War Army to the medium weight organization that it is today. The turn of the century was a time of significant financial restraint and tremendous upheaval and wide uncertainty within the Army. The vision for a future Army had already been mapped out to an extent by General Jeffries, a gunner, and just before 9/11, in fact. It was shaped in large part by the disintegration of the Soviet structure and a commitment to stabilize failed states such as in the Balkans. That as much as the lack of cash which the forces had to deal with in those days. That in essence is the prologue of our story. And then 9/11 happened. As a country, we looked as a way to signal to the US that we stood with them. Brian is covering the start of that operation, as he mentioned, with Operation Apollo, and I slide into Kabul. Next slide, please. Roto Zero of the first Operation Athena was in large part undertaken by Canada and Germany to again signal support to the US while staying as far away from their imminent invasion of Iraq as possible. Because of the stress of the Balkans that it had put on the Army, the artillery's commitment was only for a 1-year period, 2 rotations which spanned 2003 and 2004. Those 2 rotos, which were structured by General Leslie, another gunner, it was no accident that he included unmanned aerial vehicles, counter-mortar radars, and guns rather than mortars as part of the brigade headquarters and the battle group. In a large measure, those deployments opened up a path to the future for the artillery. One can't underestimate the impact of the Army's transformation on the artillery. The Army was flirting with ISTAR and debating what it was to become. There was a project well underway to replace the tanks with Stryker mobile gun systems, and most of our air defense ADATS missiles in those years were being fired at ground targets rather than aerial ones, with the aim of making them part of a fledgling composite direct fire regiment. Meanwhile, the rest of the air defense was being stripped of its weapon system, and as for guns, everyone knew that the M109s were on their way out. What we also knew was that for whatever was going to be coming down the road, it wouldn't get there for about the next 10 years. It was only going to be C3 howitzers and LG1s for a very long time to come. We didn't know then what kind of a problem those would become for us later on. Roto 1 in Kabul was followed by a pause for the artillery, as the remaining rotos in Kabul were greatly reduced in size and had no artillery as such. But gunners did participate in other tasks, such as with the strategic advisory team and in training the Afghan army. During that pause in 2005, it would end up also being a hallmark year. In July, the commander of the Army directed the reduction of gun batteries in each of the 3 regular force regiments from 3 to 2 in order to form a new surveillance and target acquisition battery. He also directed the formation of 9 task force FSCCs and an increase in forward observation detachments from 18 to 27. The cost for that was a reduction in the number of gun detachments in each battery from 6 to 4. The total regular force artillery went from 54 guns to 24. And eventually a new forward observation battery would be formed in each regiment. The focus was now on composite batteries formed from gun troops, SDA troops, fire support coordination centers, forward observers, and JTACs. The artillery regiment, except for its brigade FSCC, was no longer a force employer. It would become solely a force generator. Fires were contemplated as precision strikes, whether by air or guns. The concept of massing fires lost its importance. Next slide, please. Now, in writing that part of the story, I've, over the last year, written pretty much all of Roto 0, 2, 3, and 4. And maybe we could advance one more slide, please. Nope, I guess we go back. Sorry about that. But we've written, or I've written Roto 0, 2, 3, and 4 for the most part, including the transition to Operation Archer. Roto 1 is also mostly written, but there's still room there for more. In essence, what I'm saying is while a good part of this has been written, I'm certainly still looking forward to talking to more people who were involved in the operations in Kabul. There are many more stories to tell, and I'd very much like to get hold of those. We could move on to the next slide, please. Now, Brian's role in this story, as you've heard, is to tell the story of 2006, of Operation Task Force Orion and of Task Force 3-06. My story takes over again as Task Force 1-07 goes to Afghanistan, which is 2 RCHA and which had already deployed E-Battery on Task Force 306. What was left in 2 RCHA to deploy was around 30 people who were in Dan Bobbitt's D-Battery. They had to cobble together in a hurry an even larger battery than E-Battery had deployed previously. They were taking 6 guns with them rather than 4. They would be taking 4 FOOs with them rather than 3, and a troop each of radars and UAVs, all of which they had to integrate into a battle group which was located in Gagetown and which itself was augmented by a rifle company from Edmonton. When that battle group did arrive in Kandahar, it did not find a quiet, stable country. Theirs would not be an easy reconstruction mission as they had expected. Opendusa had not defeated the Taliban, it had just changed their tactics. The Taliban's numbers, their skills, their aggression, all of those were growing. At home, the 2005 CLS directive had been massaged into its first artillery transformation spiral. Over the 2 years of 2007 and 2008, our tactics, our commitments would change as well. In large measure, these 2 years are the story of how gunners of all ranks learned to adapt to new equipment and to new concepts of warfare that their prior doctrine and prior experience had not fully prepared them for. Next slide, please. Now, I've been working on Task Force 107 over the last fall and winter, and it too is mostly written, but I'll be doing more with it this month while my attention starts to turn towards Task Force 307 in February. My plan is to move on to Task Force the 2008 Task Force this summer. I want to finish this off with a request that I would ask you to see if you could spread as far throughout the gunner community as you can. This is your story. It's Canada's first war in over half a century, and already memories are getting lost. While we don't have access to the archives at this time, most of this story isn't in the archives anyway. This isn't a war of sweeping maneuvers and brilliant tacticians at work. It's a war of human experiences at the individual detachment and vehicle crew level. The only way that that story of our gunners in this war is going to be told is if we can talk to them and record those human experiences while we can. Frankly, while we're getting much of the story, we're also having a bit of trouble getting it all. For me, while I've already written much of Athena 1 in Kabul, I would dearly like to hear more. And I'm still looking forward to hearing more from Task Force 107 as well. And certainly the other 3 task forces that followed that. Even more importantly, Kevin Smith has been doing an outstanding job over the last year as our chief researcher, and point of contact. But this next year is going to be challenging for him supporting all three of us at the same time. If you have some time available, or you know of someone who has, would be willing to help with research, and especially in setting up and conducting interviews, it would be a tremendous help. Thank you for your time, and I'll be available for more discussion in the breakout room. But in the meantime, I'll pass this on to Mark Zulke.
Wolf. I should say that, first of all, I'm really new to this project. I joined it in December, so I'm still getting my boots on the ground, so to speak. My specialty is, as some of you may know, is actually writing about the Canadian Army in World War II. I've written 13 books on that subject, which is part of what I'm calling the Canadian Battle Series. That said, I'm really honored to be part of the writing team behind the With a Few Guns project. When Brigadier General Ernie Bino approached me to see if I was interested, it didn't take much persuasion on his part to bring me in. It sounded like a really important and necessary part of his Canadian history to deal with. Brian, I knew primarily through his fine no holding back examination of Operation Total Lies during the Normandy campaign. And since meeting Wolf, I've been very impressed by his knowledge and his creative approach to bringing the history of the gunners in Afghanistan alive. And he's using a style that's quite similar to what I use in the Canadian Battle Series books. So we've meshed together, I think, really quite well. And as Wolf said, Kevin Smith is sort of in the background, keeping us all on track and doing an incredible amount of work. I'm very appreciative of that participation. As the slide shows here, my involvement's primarily going to be focused on the end of Canada's operations in Afghanistan, which goes from 2009 to the wind down of Operation Attention, in 2004 or 2014. Next slide, please. And so here's the issues I'm facing and that we face. And I'm really hoping that some of you may be able to assist us in resolving this. As Wolf said, we don't have access to the official records. So we are really left primarily relying on veterans who deployed to Afghanistan or veterans who remained at home here, but were in support of the operations in Afghanistan in one way or another. We need you to share your stories in order to create a composite picture of the overall experience that Canadian Armed Forces artillery units and personnel experienced in these timeframes from 2009 to 2014. As the slide shows, we currently have very little source data about deployments from 2009 onward. There is some potential context for Task Force 109 emerging, but we need an awful lot more to be able to really tell the story. This is particularly the case with Francophone units. And I have to confess here, I'm not bilingual by any means. When I do try to speak French, I sound like John Diefenbaker. And so one urgent requirement is to find a Franco veteran who can assist us with interviewing other veterans who might prefer to be interviewed in French or may even have to be interviewed in French. The Franco story is really essential, and we don't want to fail in the task of bringing that to the forefront. Again, we have some contacts for 2010 and 2011, but we need to significantly build numbers there at all levels from the top down. We also have a few contacts emerging for Operation Attention, but again, we need many more. And there's the whole issue of how the Afghanistan mission developed concurrently with this artillery transformation process. So slide 3, please. Now, in my World War II work, I often run into veterans and historians who say that a certain period of the Italian campaign or the Northwest Europe campaign was relatively quiet, and so it doesn't really warrant a lot of attention. There's just not that much of a story to tell there. And inevitably, when I drilled down into those time periods, I discovered the times were anything but quiet. They might be periods when there's no large operations or battles or campaigns underway, but they're anything but quiet. For the soldiers on the ground there, this is not a quiet time. Soldiers are still dying, they're still being wounded, and they're still struggling to survive in often difficult physical and environmental conditions. We've run into this perception here that the time when US forces were transitioning into Canadian and NATO areas of operation, that things went relatively quiet for the gunners, particularly with not a lot of call for indirect fire support. But I've been reading Warrant Officer David Berube's accounts of his operations as a forward observation officer during this time period. And from his accounts, it's obvious there's nothing quiet here at all. His very gritty battles going on, and his accounts of those are brutally honest. So although there's a gradual reduction in Canadian area of operations during the US surge and a reduction to two-gun troops, there's more STA personnel deployed and other personnel. We also see, and I've been trying to capture names here so that we can try to contact them, a continuing commitment of large numbers from the reserve units. At the same time, the RCA is in transformation, beginning with divestment of resources starting to ramp up. Slide 4, please. Finally, we move to Operation Attention and the transfer to Kabul to begin the long repatriation attempt of bringing major equipment from Kandahar airfield home, and to support the Afghan National Army in expanding their fighting and operational capability. Now, we want to examine also the process of the artillery transiting toward a greater emphasis on medium forces that leaves the RCA with a legacy wherein many capability deficiencies emerge and remain. So as you can see, the challenge we face in telling the story of the RCA in Afghanistan during the period 2009 to final withdrawal is very complex, and it's reflective of anything but a quiet period in the overall war. And this is why really we need your help in ensuring that this vital story is given its full due. And I hope to see some of you in the breakout room where we can begin exploring those kind of possibilities. And with that, I'll turn it over to Master Gunner Sergeant Kevin Smith.
Thank you. Obviously, the authors each make a strong case. There's not too much for me to add. When I've run into people who are kind of hesitant to tell their story, the way I pitch it to them is, this is a family story. It's the regimental family and their own. But it's a complex story, and we need each part. So that's the main message I hope people take away from today's event is share the stories amongst yourselves, encourage others to share theirs. And we have ways in which they can reach us. Let me just go to the next slide, please. So the main way is through email, and there's a contact address there. And this is a general one. It's a catch-all kind of bin with a few guns at gmail.com. It might take a little while to get a response, but encourage others who might not be at this meeting, if they're going to do that, keep the faith. We will get back to them. And like I said, we need each piece of information they might share, whether it's big or small. And it'll go to the archives and be part of possibly other projects as well. If someone wants to help with doing interviews themselves, whether it's with their own tour or what have you, we could certainly use that. And for that, I'm putting my own address up there so I can help whoever might be interested in that understand what that would entail and coordinate it with other activities that are going on. As well, to keep the message current and where we're at, there's this Facebook group which just stood up just recently. Right now, it's open to the public. It will become a private one over the weekend. That's just a security measure, which unfortunately is necessary in the way social media works these days. But its main intent is to keep the message out there so people are aware of just how this project is progressing. And if they had questions, an easy way to reach someone to maybe get a bit more info quickly. So as I said at the beginning, it's not just about this book itself. It's obviously the primary target, the one we have to have guaranteed fire on. The DF Predict one, of course, is further down the road when we archive this information and data. so that it might be used for other sources, such as I identify there, a web page memory project. In any case, please share the message and share us your stories. Thank you.